The day my husband told me he wanted a divorce, he was actually smiling, and that smile hurt more than his words because it showed how confident he was that he had already won. He leaned against the kitchen counter like he was announcing something ordinary and said, calmly, that he was done with the marriage and wanted a divorce. I remember standing there, holding a dish towel, feeling my heart sink, but also feeling something inside me grow stronger at the same time. My name is Sarah, and at that time I was 34 years old and a stay-at-home mother raising 3 children who depended on me for everything. My life revolved around them packing school lunches early in the morning, cleaning the house, helping with homework, and making sure they felt safe and loved every single day. I had always believed in my marriage, believed in loyalty, and believed that my husband and I were building a life together. But slowly I began to realize that the man I trusted had already moved on long before he asked me for that divorce. In the beginning of our marriage, things were normal and even happy. We laughed together, talked about the future, and dreamed about raising a family in a peaceful home. Over time, our 3 children were born and our house became busy and chaotic, filled with toys, noise, and the constant responsibilities that come with parenting. I stayed home to take care of the kids while my husband worked long hours, or at least that is what he told me. I trusted him when he said he had late meetings. I trusted him when he said he had to travel for work. And I trusted him when he came home tired and distant. Looking back now, I can see the small changes that I ignored at the time, the way he suddenly became protective of his phone, the way he kept it face down on the table, the way he would leave the room to answer messages. At first, I told myself I was imagining things because marriage is built on trust, and I didn't want to believe the man I loved could betray me. But the truth eventually revealed itself in a way I could never ignore. One evening, he fell asleep on the couch while watching television, and his phone slipped from his hand onto the floor. A notification appeared on the screen that said, "I miss you already. Tonight was perfect." My heart began to pound so loudly that I could hear it in my ears. I picked up the phone with shaking hands and unlocked it. And in that moment, my entire world collapsed. There were messages, photos, and long conversations with another woman. They were not casual conversations either. They were intimate, emotional, and filled with plans for a future together. I realized the relationship had been going on for nearly a year, while I had been at home raising our children and believing we were still a family. The next morning, I placed his phone on the kitchen table, and when he walked in, I simply asked him one question. How long? He didn't deny anything, he just sighed and admitted it had been about a year. Hearing those words felt like being stabbed in the chest, but I forced myself to stay calm. Then he said he wanted a divorce, as if it was the most natural solution to the mess he had created. What he expected in that moment was that I would cry, beg him to stay, and sign whatever papers he placed in front of me. Instead, I looked at him and calmly said, "No, I would not sign anything." He looked confused and irritated and said that I couldn't stop the divorce forever. But I told him maybe not, yet I could make sure my children and I were protected before anything happened. A few weeks later, I was served with divorce papers from a very expensive lawyer he had hired. At first, I felt terrified because I had no lawyer and very little money. But then I found help through a local women's aid group that offered free legal guidance for mothers going through divorce. They explained my rights, helped me understand the legal process, and told me that I could represent myself in court if I was willing to put in the effort. So that's exactly what I did. I only paid for making copies of documents and printing paperwork while my husband was paying his lawyer. Hundreds of dollars every hour. For the next 9 months, we went through hearing after hearing in court. Each time, his lawyer presented agreements and expected me to sign them quickly. And each time, I refused until the terms were fair for my children and me. The lawyer tried to intimidate me with complicated legal language and pressure tactics, but I stayed calm, asked questions, and stood firm. Month after month, my husband grew more frustrated because every delay meant more legal fees for him and more time spent fighting in court. I was not being unreasonable. I was simply refusing to accept anything that would leave my children struggling while he started a new life with the woman he had cheated with. Around the 7th month, something began to change. My husband looked tired and stressed every time we walked into the courtroom, and even his lawyer seemed annoyed by how long the process had taken. During one hearing, the judge looked directly at him and said that the requests I was making were reasonable for a mother raising 3 children, and suggested he consider agreeing to them. That was the moment my husband realized he was not going to win by trying to pressure me into signing unfair terms. 2 months later, his lawyer approached me with a new agreement that included the financial support and protections I had been asking for from the beginning. When we stood in front of the judge for the final hearing, the judge carefully reviewed the agreement and declared that it was fair. My husband walked away with far less than half of what he once owned, and after paying his lawyer for 9 months. He had also spent a huge amount of money on legal fees. Shortly after the divorce, he moved out of state with the woman he had been cheating with, leaving our old life completely behind. For a while, I wondered if he thought it had all been worth it, if he believed he had escaped the consequences of his choices. Life moved on for me as I focused on raising my children and rebuilding our future. A few years later, I received news that shocked me. My ex-husband had died. Hearing that brought a complicated mix of emotions, sadness, anger, and a strange sense of closure. But then I learned something unexpected. Because we had been married for many years, and because of the legal agreements made during our divorce, I was entitled to collect his Social Security benefits. Even after the betrayal, the divorce, and his new life, his choices were still supporting the family he had once tried to abandon. Looking back now, I realize that revenge does not always come from anger or dramatic confrontation. Sometimes the most powerful revenge is patience, resilience, and the refusal to let someone push you into accepting less than you deserve. My husband believed that divorcing me would be easy and that I would simply step aside while he started a new life. Instead, he spent 9 months paying lawyers, lost most of what he owned, and in the end, his decisions continued to benefit the very family he had tried to leave behind. I didn't win because I fought with rage or hatred. I won because I stayed calm, stood my ground, and refused to sign away the future of my children and myself.